Hi, I'm Sloan De Forest, author of Turner Classic Movies Must-See-Sci-Fi 50 Movies That Are Out of This World. And you're watching Mr. Media.
I'm a sci-fi guy. I can track my love of the genre back to original 1960s airings of classic Star Trek, many of which scared the crap out of me. The episode titled The Cage, in particular. Those alien heads and the ability to see TV After that, I discovered old sci-fi movies on the 13-inch black and white TV in my bedroom, where I would watch such films on Saturday and Sunday afternoons when the Mets weren't playing, and also late at night when I should have been asleep. Such was the wonder of UHF TV channels and rabbit ears in the 1970s. And no, I can't trade lines from the movies, nor can I recall a lot of character names. But what I would do then, and still do today, is join any sci-fi movie in progress as I flip through the channels. I like the aliens, the exotic scenery, and the spaceships. From Metropolis and The Day the Earth Stood Still, on through Planet of the Apes, any of them, and The Martian. Which is why, when Sloan De Forest's new book, Must-See-Sci-Fi, 50 Movies That Are Out of This World, landed on my desk, I knew I wanted to talk to her about it. Sloan De Forest, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hi, Bob. Thanks
Hi.
for having me here.
My pleasure. This is a fun book.
Thank you. I had fun working on it, and I'm glad you're having fun reading it.
Have you always been a sci-fi fan, or?
It was interesting listening to your journey because mine was a little bit similar. It didn't start with Star Trek though,
Okay.
but it started with a show you may know called Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Really?
Yes, which is ironic because their whole, raison d'etre, if you will, was poking fun at bad cheesy science fiction movies. And I started watching that just because it was so funny. There was nothing else like it that had those sarcastic, kind of cutting jokes when you're watching a movie. And I thought it was hilarious. And it wasn't until I had been watching that a couple of years that I sort of realized, oh, this is an inadvertent education and kind of classic sci-fi. And then there was something in my hometown back in Irving, Texas. I don't even remember what channel it was on, but it was called Sci-Fi Saturdays. Mm-hmm. And they would show a classic science fiction movie, on Saturday. And I started tuning in for those, and that's when I realized, oh, they actually made good science fiction. I had only seen the bad ones, and so I saw Forbidden Planet, and I was like, wow, sci-fi, classic sci-fi, could actually be good. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of how it started for me.
Did you have to, explain your interest in these movies to your girlfriends in particular, or how did you have any other people who would watch this stuff with you, or did you have to watch it privately?
A few. No, I recruited a few friends who I sort of made them into Mystery Science Theater fans and made them appreciate sci-fi a little bit. But yeah, it was a difficult sell, I guess you could say.
And did you have any favorite MST3K movies that you particularly liked the way they presented before you discovered that there were good science fiction movies?
Yeah, well, there were several, I'm trying to think of some of the sci-fi ones that they did, like Teenagers from Outer Space. And I was a teenage werewolf. Actually, most people don't think of that as science fiction, but it really kind of is, mm-hmm. because he's not a typical werewolf who's like bitten by a wolf. If you remember Michael Landon, he's a manufactured werewolf because he's the product of a scientific experiment that gives him these random injections to become a werewolf. Don't ask me how that works. But those were fun. And then one in particular called Phantom Planet, which was a little bit later in the Mystery Science Theater run, was one that stands out to me as really fun and really, there's a line in that movie where in the beginning they're in space and they're taking off for a planet, in their rocket ships, and they're punching all the controls, and they're recording themselves saying it's the year 1980, and one of the film was made in like 1958, and when they say it's 1980, one of the robots says, "Oh, our old future," right? So that's how I like to think of a lot of these classic movies, is they're presenting our old future.
Exactly. And was there a particular I don't know, calculus that you used in determining what was a science fiction movie and what wasn't in terms of assembling the book?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's a really difficult thing, I found out. I mean, I put this list together with input from Turner Classic Movies. So, between all of us, it was a difficult thing to finally arrive at these 50 movies. And, and you start questioning what is science fiction? What makes a science fiction movie, really? And that's why I put it in the introduction. That was my experience on what makes science fiction. And once you ask that question, you spiral down a rabbit hole, I'm telling you, your head could explode like in Scanners thinking about it because really
Good reference.
well, really, I mean, there's science fiction movie or a movie with science fiction elements could be anything that features a fictional science of any kind, and that means Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind fits that category. And a lot of people don't think of that as science fiction, for one example. But there's a lot of movies, like I just mentioned, The Teenage Werewolf, that have actually technically have science fiction elements in them. So those technically count as sci-fi, among other genres. There's a lot of crossover. So it was difficult, in short. The short answer is it was really difficult to come up with a list and to define what makes science fiction and stick to that.
Now, in one sentence, you mentioned rabbit hole and Scanners. So I'm wondering, that was pretty good, by the way. By rabbit hole, I instantly thought of Alice Through the Looking Glass or Alice in Wonderland. Would that be considered sci-fi? Or is that
Oh, that's a
fantasy?
good question. That was my favorite book
Hmm.
growing up. Is it science fiction? I would say I can't think of anything offhand in it that is really science related, that is technology related. It's more of a fantasy,
Hmm.
yeah. But I would love to see a sci-fi version of Alice in Wonderland. That sounds good.
That would be interesting. Maybe a Barbarella-like sci-fi version of Alice in...
Yeah, well, actually, that's you just hit the nail right on the head, come to think of it, because they said, I think there was a quote somewhere, and I didn't end up using it in the book, but there was a quote about from Roger Vadim, I think, about Barbarella and his wife being a sexy Alice in Wonderland
Oh, really?
in that movie.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's exactly, I guess that is kind of an Alice story, Barbarella.
Well, I'm doing pretty good here for a Saturday. I don't
You
know.
are. You just nailed it.
And so in the introduction, I mentioned a couple of the movies that I like. Well, Metropolis, certainly. I don't see how you like science fiction without at least having seen it and having some appreciation for it. Now I have to go back and see what was the other one. Oh, The Day the Earth Stood Still, of course. Klaatu, Planet of the Apes, and The Martian. Um, I think a couple of those is The Martian in the book? I don't remember The Martian being in the book. Did that happen too late?
No, The Martian's not in the book because it's really it's kind of like Gravity. I think that's looked at as more something that's set in space that could actually happen today.
Oh, yeah, that's
There's not a
interesting.
lot of fictional science in it. It's science and it's astronauts and it's other planets, but I mean, other than the fact that he's going to Mars, I guess we don't do that yet.
Not yet.
We have rovers that do that, but I don't think we actually have a man on Mars yet. But
That's a good point.
yeah,
I keep thinking of the line though. I'm going to have to science the shit out of that to right.
yeah.
So I keep thinking science fiction. He's on Mars. Okay. Well, in terms of the other films, those other three films are all on your list. I, I I can take the criticism though. I mean, are those good movies? Do you think are those good sci-fi movies? They're in the book, but
Absolutely. No, those are great sci-fi movies. You have great taste because, I mean, Metropolis, that made the cover
right.
of so
Good choice.
Metropolis, definitely a classic and groundbreaking and something that still resonates almost 100 years later. That's still part of our culture. So that's huge. And then The Day the Earth Stood Still is one of my all-time favorites as well. Yeah, and many people's because it's just a well-crafted science fiction film, and it's a human science fiction. It's very much about people and
Hmm.
about human characters, and I think that's why it resonates as well, don't you?
Oh yeah. Well, and just that image of coming down off the coming down the ramp and the big ship and the
Hmm.
yeah. I mean, it's So you've chosen 50 books, 50 movies in the book. Um, I I assume that there were a lot more than that. Um, what got cut? What did not make the cut? And does I have to ask because Turner Classic Movies is behind the book and the series of books because we've also talked to Richard Barrios who did the musical version of this series. Um, do these movies have to be in the Turner collection to be in the book?
No, it's
Okay.
any movie.
Okay.
It's any movie is considered fair game. Yeah. And so that was not a restriction. The restriction was that they gave me. I first presented them with a list, a possible list of my 50 picks to start with, and I had originally had things like, I had Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And I had, The Thing from Another World, the 1951 version. And then I had The Thing, the John Carpenter remake. And so, I had all the remakes and sequels in there. So you can imagine we only covered like 7 movies, if there were 50.
Yeah.
So 7 original movies, or maybe a few more. But at any rate, they came back and they said, let's cut all the sequels and the remakes. We can mention those in the pieces about the originals. So let's stick to the original ones, which I was fine with, except for the fact that I had already written 1,000 words on Philip Kaufman's 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It was one of the first ones I wrote because it's one of my favorites. So we had to. I took a couple paragraphs out of that one and I managed to work them in to the 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So yeah, we discussed the remakes and sequels, but they restricted it to original films only. And aside from that, it was just the going back and forth with them on, I got to have Barbarella in there. No, it wasn't that. Barbarella's not that great a movie. And, so we had a little argument back and forth. Debate back and forth, between us about the picks. Yeah.
Well, were there any, just your opinion on this? I'm very interested. With all the sequels, because science fiction is always ripe for sequels or remakes, particularly. Um, uh, in your opinion, any remakes or sequels that were better than the original?
Better than, I really liked Blade Runner 2049. I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that it was better than that. That's a difficult question. Better than the original. The Philip Kaufman Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I think, is as good as the original. Again, I wouldn't say better. There are some that meet the standards of the original. The Empire Strikes Back, I like better than the original Star Wars. That's one where I would say I think it's better, in my opinion, yeah, than the original. But then there's a part of me that just loves anything that was there first,
Hmm.
that did it first, no matter how crudely it was done. And I'm not implying that Star Wars was done crudely, but whatever in the case, no matter how crudely it was done, I always respect the original because it did it first. So yeah, it's difficult to beat the originals in my
Hmm.
book.
And I'm thinking, I actually think that Rogue One is probably better than the original Star Wars movie, but we wouldn't have
Okay.
Rogue One without the original Star Wars movie,
Exactly.
right?
And the original Star Wars is fun because you have to, obviously people who are movie fans should know this. You know this, I'm sure. You have to use your imagination and you have to kind of imagine what it would have been like to see it. Can you imagine going to see Star Wars in 1977? Because
I did.
you hadn't seen it. Oh, you did?
I did. I actually was at the New York World premiere with the cast.
Wow,
Yeah,
how
it
exciting.
was
So
awesome.
you know what I'm talking about
Exactly,
firsthand.
yeah.
There was nothing, it probably blew you away, right? You
When
hadn't
that
seen
ship
it.
goes over your head and you have nothing to compare it to. There's nothing in your life that has ever been like, you know, uh,
Yeah.
it was less impressive that day that the cast was there because nobody knew who any of them were except Alec Guinness. But
Hmm.
that that when it went dark and that ship starts going overhead and the whole place just rocked because of the sound of it. It's like, what on earth? So yeah, no, I understand. Now the other one I would ask you about would be Planet of the Apes. The original was an incredible film for its time, just mind blowing. But actually, the first in the reset, the most recent. which actually somehow continues the story in some. You can actually make the connection. Um, that might actually have been a better film and a better telling of the tale than the original, even though it was different but the same. So you could make an argument that that's a better film, I think.
Yeah, and it is a well done film. And I mean, well, it's subjective at the end of the day.
Well, of
Of
course.
course, you can make an argument for anything, and I'm willing to go with it. But it boils down to my opinion as well, because I get to be lucky enough to write the book. So I get to have some opinion in there. But I agree with that, and I agree that, you know, there's a lot of reboots that today they make the original look primitive partly because we have the computerized technology that they didn't have back then to make them. And sometimes it's a case where, like The Thing, 1982, it wasn't about computer graphics, but they just were able to stick more closely to the original story.
Mm-hmm.
Who goes there? Was the short story that it was based on. But in 1951, Howard Hawks, even if he'd had $10 million, I don't think could have pulled off the shape-shifting monster. It would have been too difficult with that primitive technology, so he had to change it significantly from the original short story. So John Carpenter could come in 1982 and go back to the original. It wasn't really a remake of the Howard Hawks version. It was an original based on the original material. So that you can't, to me, it's apples and oranges. You can't say one's better than the other,
Is there a movie in the book that has not been remade yet that you would like to see remade because you'd be curious to see what a filmmaker and technology would do for it today?
Kind of, I'm the wrong person to ask that because I really loathe remakes. But then
Oh.
I'm contradicting myself in general. But I'm
Okay.
contradicting myself because I did say that I liked the Philip Kaufman. Now, I really like the 1978 remake of Invasion. So that's a good question. I mean, it would be interesting, speaking of The Thing, to see what they could do now with computer technology. Mm-hmm. But then without computers, again, John Carpenter did such a great job that somebody would have to come along and do something phenomenal with The Thing. But I would like to see The Thing made today. Just my curiosity compels me to want to see what they would do with it. And I would like to see women in it. Because there's nary a female character in the John Carpenter version. And I heard a quote where he said, or I saw him say that he didn't want to put any women in it because he wanted to, quote unquote, streamline it. And I was thinking, I guess women just complicate things.
Well, that might be true, but that still doesn't make sense.
It still doesn't really make sense, yeah. Because there are women who work in the Arctic, just like men. So it would have been plausible. But at the same time, I wouldn't say I want to see an Ocean's 8 where it's let's do the thing with all women.
Well, yeah.
We don't need to do that. Let's not take it that far, but
I could see, Gal Gadot in a movie like that.
Yeah,
would be
definitely.
kind of interesting. One thing that is missing from the book, and I think I know what the answer is, but there are no superhero movies in the sci-fi collection. Just a conscious decision that they could have their own book, or.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know that Turner Classic Movies is necessarily working on a superhero book, but they may be in the future. That may be something that they're doing. So that was kind of considered a separate thing, and also anime was considered separate as well. We thought, let's not get animated movies in there. There were some great Japanese animated, films that could be considered science fiction. But we didn't really want to go into that either because it was kind of a separate thing. I think we wanted to keep it live action, science fiction without the superhero crossover. Yeah, pure sci-fi as much as we could,
So 50 movies in the finished book. So what would be one or two movies that almost made the book? What got left behind?
Well, you can blame me because there's no Invaders from Mars or The Flying Saucer from 1950, I believe. Those are two that I cut, that I had them cut to get two of my picks back in there because they cut Barbarella and Alphaville off the list. And I really wanted those movies back in there because I tend to like the kind of quirky, offbeat. Barbarella was just was a movie that I was a fan of from a young age. And I am a fan of the costume design and the set design, and it's just so quirky. It's so not quirky is not even the right word. It's outlandish. It's insane. It's there's nothing else like it. And I wanted to talk about that movie, so I had them, and they were kind enough to agree to comply to knock those two movies off the list. Not that Invaders from Mars isn't an important film in its way, but just Barbarella trumped it to me, and Alphaville trumped the other one. So yeah, those two didn't make the list, and there were several actually that I wanted to write about that didn't get on there. Like Gattaca is another one. Galaxy Quest.
I love that movie. Yeah, I forgot about that.
I love Galaxy Quest too. I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but there were several. There were several that we talked about including, but didn't make the final cut. Yeah.
Galaxy Quest suffer from being derivative?
No, I don't think that was it. I think that there just wasn't room. I mean, in some cases, there's no good reason why the movie was left off. There just wasn't room for it. We had to cut something. And I think I wanted to include Galaxy Quest. TCM cut it. Maybe they have their own reasons. I don't remember that they explained it to me. Maybe they felt that they could lose that one because it was more lightweight. I think comedies are sometimes considered more lightweight and less groundbreaking because it was, I mean, you're right, it was derivative in the sense, intentionally derivative,
right,
because it was a parody of, things that had already been done. So I don't know why it was cut, but I didn't get to write about it. That's all I know.
Well, I'm not sorry that Spaceballs did not make the book.
Yeah.
I know
Me neither.
Some people are like, oh, that's one of the great. No. But there was just another one came to mind. Battle Beyond the Stars with Richard Thomas from the Waltons. Mm-hmm. That was actually pretty good.
It was,
underrated.
And I would have liked to talk about that as well. I'm hoping that, we can do an event perhaps with Roger Corman. We're in discussions to maybe do a screening here in Hollywood with Roger Corman present where we could show like maybe Star Wars and Battle Beyond the Stars, because it's clearly influenced by Star Wars.
It's so funny. When I said it, I forgot. Roger Corman, of course, wrote the introduction to your book. I wasn't even thinking of him. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, it just completely slipped my mind that was his film. Yeah,
it was.
Fun movie. And there's another one you probably would never even heard of. And I had the gentleman on the show, and it's gonna kill me that I can't think of. I think the movie was called Destination Black Planet. It was about a year or two ago. It's an independent sci-fi film. He made it for like very little money, but it's a really fun, racially charged.
I don't know that movie.
The director, he's written some. He's done some movie. He did it. His previous movie was with Spike Lee. It was not Chi-Town. Shoot, folks. I will put the cover of the movie on the blog page with this interview, so you'll know that I wasn't making this up.
And get the information.
Yeah, I'll look it up. But he's a film professor at University of Kansas, I believe. Anyway, fun movie. I'll pass it on to you after I remember what it is.
I would have liked to have seen that one. We tried to include as much diversity, as we could. Speaking of racial, movies, but the Hollywood has kept sci-fi pretty white, I have to say. So it was difficult. We managed to get The Brother from Another Planet.
Mm-hmm. I saw that. That's on the list. His movie was funny because there was a decision. Black people were so tired of being, and which is weird that it came out before Trump, but. They were in the film. They're so sick of being meeting up with bigotry and prejudice that they decide to go to another planet. And so, I'll just leave it at that.
Destination Black Planet. That sounds.
I'm pretty sure it's either the exact title or it's so close, and I just can't think of it. All right, coming back to your book. So, of the 50 movies, and we've talked about a bunch of them now. And if you want to repeat one, that's fine. I'm wondering what would be the top three for someone who hasn't seen a lot of science fiction and has kind of maybe avoided it because they're like, oh, that's just trash. If they could, on their own, pull up Netflix or Amazon when nobody's watching, or Turner Classic Movies, what would be three sci-fi films that would change their mind about science fiction?
Well, I think one that you mentioned first off, The Day the Earth Stood Still, is would be definitely in the three because it's so accessible. It's a really accessible science fiction movie, I find, because there aren't any monsters with tentacles that are green. It's not that. It's not. It's, as I mentioned before, it's a human science fiction movie, and it's a, I mean, Klaatu could be any one of us. He could just be an outsider. It could be something, a story of an outsider, kind of like the Man Who Fell to Earth with David Bowie, which is really a story about, alienation. And I think kind of The Day the Earth Stood Still is something that everybody can relate to if you've ever felt persecuted or alienated or, in a hostile environment. And then another one would definitely be The Terminator, because if you're not a fan of sci-fi, I find people still love The Terminator because it's, I mean, a lot of people didn't think of it really as pure science fiction, I guess, when it came out. It was thought of kind of as an action movie, set in, because it's not set in the future, it's set in the present. It's really clever, I think. I love The Terminator. It's one of my favorites. And I think it's really clever because it's set in the present day. I mean, we have flashbacks to, we have past flashbacks to the future. My head's gonna explode now, like in Scanners, but you know what I mean. We have past, future, flash forwards or backwards, but it's mainly set in the present day, and it's just a nonstop action story. That it's not just action. I mean, it's great storyline. It's romance. It's sort of something for everyone. Yeah, but you asked me three.
Yes,
what would
I
a
did.
third one be? Yeah, I'm avoiding that because I can't think. Let's see. Let's flip through my book here
Okay.
and think what one would be. Someone who's avoided science fiction. Well, who could not love Blade Runner? That's another one.
Okay.
And if you go back to classic monster movies, I love The Fly.
Oh, yeah. The original or Jeff Goldblum?
Both,
Yeah.
really. I mean, the David Cronenberg version, it gets a little too gross for me, I have to say. I'm not really into gross out movies. Not that it's a gross out movie. That's kind of dismissive. It's a great film, but it gets a little disgusting.
It was a little past where you needed to go.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like I could have stopped it. Okay, and that could have been suggested. All of that slimy body parts falling off could have been suggested a little bit more rather than shown. But I like both versions of The Fly. I think people really get into those movies as well.
So, as someone who was kind of introduced to sci-fi by Mystery Science Theater 3000, and then found that there were good films to be seen, sci-fi movies rarely get Oscar attention. Do you think that will ever change, or do you think that...
I do. I think it's already changing because we're already seeing some Oscar talk. I mean, talk is cheap, but at least we're seeing more Oscar talk and more Oscar, buzz about science fiction movies with District 9 and Arrival.
Oh, District 9, great movie.
Yeah, that one again was to be honest, it was hard for me to get through. It was gross.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. That's true.
I know that sounds so silly to
No,
some
no,
people.
no.
Probably, ew, it's gross. I'm a girl. I don't mean it that way, but I like movies that are a little more subtle, I guess, and I'm not so much into the gross out aspect of it. But it's a great film, as was Arrival. That didn't end up winning anything, I think, but at least they're nominating them more, And I think we're coming into an era where there's a new type of science fiction that's taken a little bit more seriously, where it's not about. Again, I think I mentioned in the book at some point in the introduction or something, it's not so much, or in my piece on Arrival, I think I say it's not so much about blowing aliens away with heavy artillery anymore as it's about, having something a little more thought-provoking. And I think that's interesting. I think we're living in a time when sci-fi is taken more seriously. So I think it will start to win more Oscars. Everything, it takes a long time with the Academy to take some of these genre films seriously, like horror as well.
A lot of old people have to die off in the voting.
Yeah.
I know. It's like a lot of things in life.
Mm-hmm. It will get there.
In doing the research for each of the films, you present some interesting facts and things anecdotally. Are there one or two factoids or things that you discovered that made you go, "Wow, I can't wait to share this with people"?
Yeah, probably a few. Let's see, what were some of the ones that I discovered? Well, I discovered a lot of things about Godzilla that I hadn't known. I don't know as far as factoids so much, but I discovered the film itself, the original version, the Japanese version,
Mm-hmm.
Gojira, which was a big revelation to me. And maybe I'm late hopping on board that, but that was one that I was like, oh my God, if people haven't seen the original Godzilla, that was exciting to me. I have to get them excited about it to see it.
It wasn't the same cartoon it became when it was translated and dubbed and
Not at all.
yeah.
Not at all. I think a lot was lost in translation. It was really it's much more of a tragedy and a comment on society than it is just a, big lizard stomping around, squishing buildings with his foot.
Mm-hmm.
That was, not that there's anything wrong with that if you're into it.
Sorry, it made me laugh. I you've done a couple of film books at this point. Do you want to talk to folks a little bit about your background in terms of film? What got you interested in writing about film, and how you choose a project to work on?
Sure. Well, you know about the MST3K story, my background there.
Right.
So that was kind of an education in some classic B movies and Ed Wood movies and all of that. That's how I sort of came into it. And then I was an actress when I was younger. Really, my aspiration was to be an actor. And I was a professional, actress for many years. And so I was on many film sets. And back in my early 20s, I really couldn't afford to go to, a high quality acting school or camera acting classes. I didn't have the budget for that. So I ended up going to the video store, in my hometown and just renting a lot of classic movies because I felt my reasoning was, well, I don't want to learn how to act by watching current day movies because that we may like something today, but in 10 years or 20 years, it may not hold up. So I thought if I watch movies with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn and Greta Garbo, those are performances that are timeless. Mm-hmm. That will be the best thing to teach me really what I need to know about camera acting. And so that's how I came into it as an actor and studying acting using classic films. And then the classic films kind of took over, really, took on a life of their own. And I became obsessed with classic movies. Then Turner Classic Movies came along, and I watched a lot of that. And it was something I was interested in and passionate about. I never said, I want to be a film writer when I grow up and write about films. That was never on my agenda. So I think that's good in a way because I educated myself by being passionate about things and things that I was really interested in. And I don't look at myself today as a, even though, as you say, I've written some books, I ended up getting, jobs in Los Angeles, writing about classic film, doing film synopses and, things on the internet and then working up to being able to contribute to a book about Natalie Wood, Reflections on a Legendary Life, a book about Grace Kelly, Hollywood Dream Girl, and then leading to my own book, The Sci-Fi. So that's kind of my background trajectory. But even today, I don't look at myself as someone who has a degree in classic film and who is, a film expert. I look at myself as someone who's passionate about movies, and I'm lucky to get to be able to write professionally about them. But I still have a lot to learn. And that's not an apology. That's something that I'm proud of, because I come into movies like a typical fan, excited about it, like a kid, and I think I hope that comes through in my writing. And I don't ever want to sound so academic and so pompous and like movies are so important. They are important, but they're also entertainment. Mm-hmm. And I don't ever want to lose sight of that. Movies are meant to entertain you and put a smile on your face, and they're enjoyable.
So you've got a video store film degree the same way that some guy named Tarantino did. Only you focused on quality classic movies. He focused on quality classic B movies. I mean,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Me and Tarantino were so much alike now that you mention it. Yeah. We have the same alma mater.
um, yeah, well, I mean, there's no shame to be taken in learning about film from getting them at the old video store when we had video stores.
No,
Um,
exactly. That was a great education right there. Tarantino has a great quote, in fact, and he said, I didn't go to film school, I went to films.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think I did both. I wound up with a film degree, but long before that, I was watching those UHF channels all hours of the day and night, watching all kinds of movies, and I'll still drives my wife crazy.
Yeah.
If there's like an old movie on as I'm going through the channels, I'll just stop there. It drives her crazy because she doesn't want to start in the middle.
Yeah.
I'll just pick up wherever it is. If there's a good scene, I'll just get sucked into it. Um,
Yeah.
so the last thing I want to ask you about was actually, and you mentioned the Natalie Wood book. I had Marty Rulli on, who's
Oh, okay.
she wrote the book a few years ago with Dennis Davern, who was the
Goodbye,
captain.
Natalie. Goodbye, Splendor. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And so I wanted to just ask you if you had any thoughts. Earlier this year, there was sort of a break in the case where the police acknowledged that they still considered they actually consider Robert Wagner a person of interest, and he was not off their radar. Nothing seems to have happened since then. I was just curious if you had any thoughts on the case. I have not read your book, I admit,
Yeah.
so if I'm taking you
I
too
have
far
a
afield.
lot of thoughts on the case, actually. But if there are fans of your show who are interested in Marty Rulli and Dennis Davern's take on it, that's great. More power to them. I happen to think that that's a lot of built-up sensationalism to sell books, personally,
Okay.
and I feel like there was no break in the case recently. Actually, they've always thought of Robert Wagner as a person of interest because he is a person of interest, because he's the last person to see her alive. And Christopher Walken is also a person of
Mm-hmm.
interest. Dennis Davern was also on the boat. So, all three of those men, you know, did not hear anything going on, or they would have done something to save her. And the upshot of it is it was an accident, but people don't want to admit that. People can't admit that because it's not as exciting as thinking that there was foul play involved. It's a difficult thing to just say, well, it was just a horrible accident and that's it. I think there's a letdown factor in that. So I think we want to build it up to more than it was.
Mm. So,
Sad. It's sad for Natalie because she was such an amazing talent.
mm-hmm.
And I think that now her body of work and her life has been overshadowed by her death. So I would like to steer the conversation away from that if we could.
Sure.
I mean, I'm talking about at large, with the community at large. That would be my goal. And that was the goal of our book, to focus on her career and her life.
I understand. Well, I thought I'd ask it. Just seemed
Yeah,
like it
I'm
was
glad
more.
you did.
It was a little more current than it might have been in a different year. Do you have another book coming up? Is something else that you're working on now?
I do, as a matter of fact. I am working on a book called Dynamic Dames. It's also going to be for Turner Classic Movies and Running Press, and it's going to be the 50 most strong and empowered female characters in film. So I'm really excited about that one.
Very cool. Very cool. All
Yeah.
right. Let's see, folks. You can find Sloan De Forest's latest book as well as her other books, but this one we're talking about is Must-See-Sci-Fi: 50 Movies That Are Out of This World. It's in great bookstores everywhere, or you can order it right now at a great price right here on MrMedia.com. If you are watching the video or listening to the show on the website, MrMedia.com, either to the left or to the right below us, you'll see the cover of the book. You can click on it right now and order it and have it, I don't know, maybe in 30 minutes if you have Amazon drone delivery. Otherwise, you might have to wait a day. So, do you have a website? Are you on Twitter, Facebook, any of that kind of stuff?
I'm not a big fan of social media, but I think we started a thing for Dynamic Dames, on the social media, on Facebook and Twitter. There's a Dynamic Dames account. It's brand new. So follow that if you want to hear about the upcoming book.
Okay.
And and I have also a website, sloandeforest.com. So I try to post events and things that I'm doing there. And I will post this interview there when it goes up.
Very good. We appreciate that. A lot of fun talking to you. Fun book. Makes for good conversation. And Sloan De Forest, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Media, today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Media Bob. It was a pleasure to be here.